Hello to all my relatives out there this evening. Bapewa Gush Nindajinikaj, Laughing Fox is my name. Nindamikazi Dudem, I come from the Eagle Clan, and Misquabi Kong Nindunjaba. I'm a member of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. We're also known as the Ojibwe, and we call ourselves the Anishinaabe. And we have called this place home for many, many generations. The stories that I'm going to tell tonight are stories that have been passed on from generation to generation. And it goes back so far that we don't even know how far back it goes. I only know that my own teacher, my Nokomis, my grandmother, that she would always start her storytelling off with, a long time ago, back when the world was forever cold. Back during the Ice Age time she was talking about. And when we look at those first peoples, those indigenous peoples, we have to look back at some of those older village settlements that we had found. Some of them carbon dating back a very, very long time. I just got back from a trip to Maine where I was visiting the Wabanaki people, and they showed me a site out there that carbon dated back 14,000 years ago, an old village site. In Sault Ste. Marie, up on the Michigan side of Lake Superior, the east side, there is a small village in there that carbon dated back 11,000 years ago. So people have been living on the south shore of Lake Superior ever since the melting of the last ice age. They had just found tracks in New Mexico that carbon dated back 20,000 years ago. They estimate that we crossed the land bridge, depending on who you ask, that we crossed the land bridge some 35,000 years ago. And some people say there are more tracks going the other way. Because they found some New World crops in Egypt. They found some tobacco and mummies and I guess some other things too that come from the New World. So history, we are constantly rediscovering that. And when we look at our history and some of those similar stories that every culture all across the world share, like the flood story. Every culture across the world has some sort of a flood story. And when we look at that part of our history, we can see that there are more things connecting us than there are disconnecting us. For we, as the Anishinaabe people, the Ojibwe people, we would become the Ojibwe people some 2,000 years ago. We would break off of one mother group of Algonquin-speaking people, and we would migrate through the Great Lakes chain systems. And as we migrated through the Great Lakes chain systems, we would break off to become 29 different Algonquin-speaking groups. Some of those are the Cree, the Potawatomi, the Menominee, the Odawa, the Wabanaki, to name a few. There's 29 different tribes associated with that. It said that we had we had migrated from the east coast and had made our way to where the food grows upon the water, which our medicine people interpreted as the wild rice. And when we found this area in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan, it was just full of wild rice. So we knew that our stories, our prophets, had led us to our promised land on the shores of Lake Superior. Madeline Island, which is one of the 22 Apostle Islands, right? So, you know, there's the Apostle Islands, there's 22 of them. So not only were the first explorers lost at sea, but apparently they couldn't count either. 22 Apostle Islands, wait a second, what? So I come from that area up there, and we have a lot of history. But tonight I'm here to tell stories, mixed in with a little bit of that history. And we as Anishinaabe people, as Indigenous people in general, we have creation stories for everything out there. We have creation stories on why the raccoon wears a mask. We have creation stories on how Turtle Island was made, Turtle Island, North America. And we even have creation stories on why the Animush, the dog, why the dog smell each other's butts. Yes, we even have stories like that out there. But my elders always told me that whenever I do a storytelling, I'm always to start with the creation story of the flute. And the creation story of the flute is said to be one of unconditional love. That unconditional love we feel for our grandparents, our parents, our children, our siblings, most of the time, right? It's about that unconditional love. And this story starts like a lot of stories start. A long time ago, in a village far, far away, there was a young man in this village. And this young man, he was good at everything. He was good at hunting. He was good at fishing. He was a good provider. But one thing he was not good at is he was not good at expressing his feelings. And one day, this young man came back from a hunt. He was successful. And the village celebrated his success. He would look across the fire and he would see the image of this beautiful young woman, his heart's desire. And he would think to himself, this is it. This is when I go up to her and I tell her how I feel about her. So the young man, he would work up his courage and he would walk up to her and he would open his mouth. And no words came out. Embarrassed, he retreated to the outskirts of the village, where he would watch as other young men of the same age would talk to her and try to get her attention and her affection. And this frustrated the young man. But he remembered his stories, his teachings from his elders. And they taught him that there is a love medicine out there. And it said that this love medicine is held by the Ayabe, who is a huge albino buck that lives to the west. And this young man thought to himself, if I can somehow hunt this Ayabe, I can somehow get that love medicine, and then I can give it to my heart's desire, and then she will know how I feel about her. So the young man, he would pack up a bunch of provisions, and he would go out into the woods, and he would find the biggest set of tracks that he could find, and he would say to himself, this is it. This has got to be the Ayabe. So he started to follow those tracks, and they led him deeper and deeper into the woods, further and further away from his village. He would see a flash of light out of the corner of his eyes. The Ayabe! And he pulled back his bow and arrow, but they would be gone. He'd follow those tracks again. They lead him still deeper and deeper into the woods, further and further away from his village, and he would see that flash of light out of the corner of his eyes. The Ayabe! And he'd pull back his bow and arrow, but it would be gone. Finally, the young man, he was exhausted from his travels, and he made a fire underneath a cedar tree. And as he sat there, looking at the fire, listening to the crackle and pop, he heard a sound way off into the distance. That sound would lull him to sleep. And the next day, the young man, he would wake up to the sound of a knocking. And he would open his eyes and he would look up into that tree and he would see that there was a beneshi in that tree. There was a bird in that tree. And that beneshi had been dancing on a branch. And as it danced on a branch, it began to knock holes into that branch. And then it flew away. And when it flew away, the wind picked up and it went over those holes. And it made that same sound that the young man had heard in his dreams. The young man knew instantly that that's what he was looking for. He would step up and he would reach up into that tree and he would grab a hold of that branch like that and he would break it off. And as he sat there studying it, he tried to figure out how to get that sound to come from it. So he started to blow on it like this. Nothing. He'd blow on it like this. Still nothing. He was even going like this, trying to get the wind to pass through the holes. Still, no sound came forth. Again, he was out of answers. So he would sit down and look at the fire. Then he would remember again his teachings from his elders, that whenever you seek something, you have to offer something. The young man would reach into his pouch and he would pull out some asema, some tobacco, sacred to the indigenous peoples. We use it to talk to the spirits, to commune with the Creator. The young man would say a prayer to the spirit of that bird, and he would offer his asema, his tobacco, to the fire, which would turn his tobacco into smoke, bringing his prayers up to be heard by the spirits. While he was sitting there waiting for an answer, he got tired and he went to sleep. And in his dreams, the bird visited him and it asked him, "What is it that you are seeking?" And the young man told him of his dilemma, told him about his heart's desire and his inability to communicate his feelings, told him about his frustrations at the other young men in his village, told him about how the Ayabe had led him to this spot in the woods where he heard this unique, beautiful sound. After a while of listening, the dream bird took pity on the young man and decided to teach him the secret of the bibiguan, the Ojibwe word for flute. He would tell him how long to make the flute. He would tell him where to put the holes into the flute. And he said, whenever you blow into the bibiguan, you close your eyes and you have the image of your heart's desire here and you feel it in your heart. And when you blow into the bibiguan, it'll wabiguan out of the other end. Wabiguan, the Ojibwe word for flower. Your feelings will flower out of the other end, and people will know how you feel. Upon waking from this vision, the young man begins to construct the very first bibiguan out in the woods. And as he's almost done with it, he carves out a bird to put on top of the flute out of love, respect, and honor for the one who taught him how to make that unique, beautiful sound. After he had created the very first flute, he made his long journey back home. And each time that he would stop to take a break, a beneshi, a bird, would land by him, and it would sing to him, and it would encourage him to use his flute to do the same. The young man would make his way back home, and as he stood on a hill, he looked down and he could see everybody in his village was all working hard. They were all getting ready for the changing of the seasons. Some people were working on birch bark canoes. Some people were gathering berries. Some people were dancing on wild rice. Some people were drying out meat. Some people were smoking fish, right? Smoke fish, not drugs, right? That's what I tell my students. This young man, he would stand on this hill and he would watch all the people working, and he would close his eyes and he would have that image of his heart's desire here, and he would feel it here, and he began to blow into the flute. That sound made its way from the flute and down the hill and into his village. And everyone that heard that sound, they stopped what they were doing, because no one had ever heard anything like that before. Finally, that sound made its way to the wigwam, the traditional home of the Anishinaabe people, the wigwam of the young woman. And as soon as she heard that sound, she knew instantly that that was for her. She would come out of her wigwam, she would look up onto that hill like that and see that young man standing up there making that unique, beautiful sound. And she knew who he was. And she always wondered why he would never talk to her. She would go and stand next to him. And she was so amazed and overwhelmed that somebody could express so much emotion without uttering a single word. And as she listened, she realized that the sound was actually intertwining their spirits together. When I first started learning my stories, I was just a little kid, Head Start. And I was blessed to have the same teacher from Head Start all the way until I graduated high school. So winter time is story time for the indigenous people in this area. And we do that because we say that there are certain spirits that are hibernating and sleeping in the winter time. And this is a time when we're allowed to talk about their teachings. So that's one of the big reasons why the Ojibwe people, and I'm not sure about the Lakota or the Dakota, but I know for the Ojibwe, we kind of stayed true to that storytelling element in our culture. And as I started to learn our stories, I was just a little kid. And at that age, you know, we all kind of run around and we're really crazy and wild. And sometimes we get on our parents' and grandparents' nerves. And I remember my Nokomis, my grandmother, she would tell me, she would say, Bazanian to me. And she would say Bazanian to me so much that I actually thought that was my Indian name. She would say Bazanian, and I would say, right here, Grandma. And she would say, Gawi, no, Bazanian means be quiet. You're too loud. Followed up with the Umbeo, come here. Namutabin, sit down, isn't done, listen. And she would start her storytelling off like that. And she would say, I'm going to tell you another story about a kid named Winnabuju who went around in his village and he had all these great ideas that he wanted to share with all the adults. But because he was just a little kid, nobody would take Winnabuju seriously. And so Winnabuju, he had all these great ideas that he wanted to share. And he would go up to people who were working on a birch bark canoe. And he would interrupt their important work, and he would start to tell them how to do their jobs better. He would say, I'm Winnabuju, I know everything. You're doing that all wrong if you lash your canoe this way using these spruce roots. And they would tell him, oh, Bazanian, Winnabuju, you're just a little kid, you know, go off into the woods, go play and be a little kid. And all day long, Winnabuju, he was met with that attitude from the adults in his village, and it got him very, very frustrated. And at the time, he sought out the counsel of his Nokomis, his grandmother. And he would go out into the woods, and he would find his grandmother out there picking medicines. And he would go up to her and say, Nokomis, Nokomis, I have a problem, can you help me with it? And she would say, why yes, Winnabuju, what is it? How can I help you? And he began to tell her the story. Well, none of the adults in the village will listen to my great ideas. I have all these great ideas, and none of them will listen to me. They all just think I'm a dumb little kid. And she said, well, Winnabuju, what are you asking me? And he said, Nokomis, grandmother, I know you're very knowledgeable in plant medicines. Is there a medicine out there that'll help me get smarter? She said, oh, Winnabuju, you want to be smarter? Why? He said, well, they all think I'm a dumb little kid, so when I'm the smartest man alive, everybody in the village is going to have to do what I say, because my ideas are going to be the best, and they're all going to listen to me. Everybody in the world is going to listen to me because I'm going to be the smartest man alive. And Nokomis, she kind of thought about this, you know, coming from this little kid, like, oh, okay, Winnabuju. She said, you know what, there is a medicine out there that can help you, but I have to go out there and gather it. You'll have to come back. So a very excited Winnabuju, he runs out into the woods, and he finds a nice clearing out there, and he starts to have these ideas, these grandiose ideas and thoughts about how everybody in the village was going to do what he says because he's going to be the smartest man. How everybody in the world is going to do what he says because he's going to be the smartest man alive. This prospect excited him so much that he couldn't contain his excitement. He would run back to his grandmother and find her picking medicines in the woods. And he would run up to her and say, Nokomis, Nokomis, did you find that medicine that will help me get stronger? And she would say, why, yes, I did, Winnabuju, it's right here. And she would reach into her pouch and she would pull something out. And she would say, here, Winnabuju, eat these. These are smart berries. These will make you smarter. And Winnabuju, he kind of looked at what she held in her hand. And he made this skeptical face. And he looked down there, and then he went down there and he put his nose down there. And then he smelled it. And he said, oh my gosh, Nokomis. He said, that's rabbit poop. And she goes, oh, see, Winnabuju, it's working. You're getting smarter already. My Nokomis, my grandmother, she would actually pull out a cellophane baggie full of rabbit poop. And if we weren't listening to her stories, she would dare us to eat it. She would open it up and she would say, oh, you're smart enough, you don't need to listen to your stories anymore. Here, why don't you have some more smart berries? But of course, we already heard the story by then, so we all smartened up, right? We're all like, oh, no thank you, Grandma, we know what those are. But many years later, we would find out that the joke would really be on us, because really what she was trying to feed us was only chocolate-covered raisins. I like to tell that story first because it's one of the first stories that I remember listening to as a little kid. And every winter, my Nokomis, my grandmother, my storyteller, she would come into our classroom and she would tell these stories and she would repeat them. Every year we would hear the same stories. And every year we would hear those values and those morals that come with those stories. Even though this story is funny and we're laughing at it, it does have some very deep meanings to it. It could be a story about wisdom, about using that gift from the Creator, that wisdom, to know what's good for us and what's not good for us. Or maybe it's a story to children about having the patience to let experience be their true teacher. I know that for me, listening to these stories throughout my whole life, I've been able to take different things as I experience different things throughout my life. So those stories take on different meanings for me as well. And I would use these teachings to guide me in my life. And when I found my first flute, I would go out and I would do just as she said. I would go out into the woods and I would sit down and I would be quiet and I would listen. And I would listen to how the wind sounds through the trees. I would listen to how the raindrops sound on everything. And I would listen to how the stream sounds. And I would try to imitate these things. And one day when I was sitting out there just listening, I could hear something coming behind me, an animal was coming my way. And I knew it was too small of an animal to be anything serious, like a makwa, like a bear. And when I finally looked over my shoulder to see what it was a squirrel, an ajitamo, followed by another squirrel. And pretty soon these two ajitamo were running around the woods, all making these noises. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to try to scare them away with my flute. You know, I had heard stories that flute players could talk to animals. So I thought, I'll experiment with that. So I started to imitate those animals out there, thinking I would scare them away. But a funny thing happened is they didn't scare away. They actually got more curious and they came closer to me. It was a very surreal moment for me in the woods, as I had felt like I was speaking to my relatives. And later on, I would tell my mother that same story and she would just look at me and say, oh, you're just nuts. That's why they listen to you out there. I tell my students too, you know, it's a good thing to listen to your elders, to listen to your grandparents, your parents, your teachers, educators. But there are teachers out there in the woods. And if you go out there and you sit and you listen, you will learn something too. This next song I'm going to share with you is called Ajitamo Waning, which means squirrel tail. And it's the first song that I had learned on the flute. And I learned it from two squirrels. I would learn many years later too that I was really imitating the squirrel's territorial call. So really what they were doing was actually coming to see who this big squirrel was. And what they had to do to take care of that, right? Ajitamo Waning, squirrel tail. culture in the public school system was a good thing that many other Indigenous students didn't get the opportunity to have like I had. I was in a school of 75% Indigenous students, so we all supported each other as we reclaimed that which was taken from us. And I started to learn more and more about that difficult relationship that we shared with the US government. And I would learn things like we didn't become US citizens until 1924. I would learn that we didn't have freedom of speech until 1968. And I would learn things like we didn't have freedom of religion until 1978. That's only 45 years ago that we've been allowed to practice our culture, our language, our religion without fear of persecution from the US government. Before 1978, we had generations and generations of silence where our voices and our opinions didn't matter. And it's going to take a while for a people to learn how to effectively use that voice to communicate some of those generational traumas that we had been through. And through this difficult conversation, we have compassion and empathy, and we have acceptance and acknowledgement of those things. And after we have those things, we can move on together in a more inclusive future, where we all honor and respect each other. And growing up in the school system and learning these things, it's different for every generation. As my mother's generation dealt with it with anger, I dealt with it using the medicines and trying to forgive. And my children, they deal with it in their own way as well, as we learn these harder truths of our history. While I was learning these things and trying to implement the culture back in my own community, I would become a parent myself. And we had many discussions on what we were going to name our children. Some discussions were in English, but then we started to talk about what the Indigenous people had gone through in this country. We started talking about the Indian Removal Act of the 1800s. We started to talk about the Indian Civilization Act that gave birth to the boarding school situation. We talked about how Indigenous children were taken from their homes, how they were beaten for speaking their language, how their traditional regalia was burned up, how practicing any kind of culture would lead to their punishment. They could come right into your home and take your children. They could ban your language. Can you imagine people coming into your home and taking your children and renaming them in some other language? You think maybe you would grab a weapon or something, and then you go out to defend your family, and then you have the cavalry, the might of the cavalry, saying, if you do this, this is what you face. And they have technological superiority, right? So I'd like to ask that of my audiences. As I travel all over Turtle Island and all over the world, I bring up these dates because a lot of people are unaware of these dates that have happened. This next song that I'm going to share with you comes from a time when I had lost somebody. And during that time, and this is why I talk about the children too, because so many of people who are dealing with that generational trauma miss their siblings, miss their children, miss their entire childhoods, the people who I've talked to. And my daughter, when we had a home birth, and that's when we decided to name her in the Ojibwe language. And we did this for a few different reasons. One was because we wanted our community and our friends and family to see how proud we were to use the language like that, how proud we were to name our children in the Ojibwe language again. And we had a hope that it would encourage them to do the same. And now I can proudly say that there are a lot more Ojibwe children up in my village that do now have Ojibwe names. My Ojibwe name is Michael, or my English name is Michael. My Ojibwe name is Bape Wagush, which means laughing fox. My daughter doesn't have an English name. Her name is Indeaki, meaning my heart of the earth. And her mother and I didn't work out, and she ended up leaving, and she left all the way to France. Can you believe that? Anyways, she went all the way to France, and I thought, like a big strong man, I can take all this. But we had home birth, I was bonded to my daughter, and it left a gaping hole inside of me. And so I started to use the teachings of the flute. I imagined my daughter, and I started to play, and I could see her. And that's where this song comes from. This song is a healing song. This song is for those who we love unconditional, those of us who still suffer from illness and disease, those of us in our lives who have passed away, those of us in our lives who suffer from addiction. These are the ones who we keep in our thoughts during this song. This song is called Indeaki, My Heart of the Earth. I want to make sure that I give you guys a little bit, a little aspect of our culture. The flutes are one of the oldest instruments out there for all of us. The very first flute that they found carbon dated back between 40,000 and 60,000 years ago. And when they found this flute, it was made out of the rib bone of a cave bear. And so the flute has been with us for a very long time, resonating within our human DNA for a very long time. The drum is also a very old instrument. And every culture all across the world has some sort of a drum, some sort of a flute, and some sort of a rattle. The drum represents the heartbeat of Mother Earth. And it's the first rhythm that we hear while we're in our mother's wombs. It's very comforting. The drum, the Ojibwe word for drum is the wagon. And when we break that down in English, it literally means the heart-sounding instrument. So it's a very beautiful, the Ojibwe language is so beautiful, very, very descriptive. Every one of our words has meaning behind it. And I feel that's true about all of our indigenous languages. And please keep in mind, my European American friends, that we are all indigenous from somewhere. And we all have that inherited connection to those indigenous languages that were gifted to us by our spirits, by our creators, to help guide us in our hard times. So it's important that we remember that about ourselves, that we all come from somewhere and we are all indigenous from somewhere. The drum has many stories to it. I know a few different ones. The one that I'll share with you today is the story about two warring nations that were able to come together in a peaceful peace treaty. And this happens in the time when the Lakota and the Ojibwe were at war with each other. And we don't know how long they were at war with each other. I heard some people say 100 winters. So we were at war with each other. But we would face a threat that we had never faced before. And a Lakota village was attacked by the U.S. cavalry. And the U.S. cavalry had annihilated this village. There was one survivor of this village. Her name was Tail Feather Woman. And she would seek refuge in a pond. And she would break off a reed by that pond, and she would breathe through this reed. And the story goes that she was in the water, underneath the water, breathing like this for 4 days. And while this was happening, she would have a dewachike, a vision. And in this vision, she would see 4 horses coming from the east, and they were carrying the dewagon. And they would hand down the dewagon to the people. And when the coast was clear and it was safe for her to emerge from the waters, Tail Feather Woman would take that message back to the nearest Lakota village, and she would tell the people what happened to her, to the village, and she would tell them about the vision that she had. And the medicine people of the village had interpreted this as the 4 horses from the east being the Anishinaabe, as we had migrated from the east and came from the east. And they had interpreted the drum as a peace ceremony. And they would make a drum, and after they had put all the beads and said all the prayers, they would take the drum to the village of Mille Lacs. And it said that when the villagers of Mille Lacs looked out and they saw thousands of Lakota warriors, they thought this was going to be their last day on earth. But instead, Tail Feather Woman would step forward and she would offer the drum in the drum ceremony in a peaceful peace offering. And the idea was that our warriors would lead us to peace. That the first ones seated on that drum were warriors who had faced each other in battle, who had maybe even killed each other in battle. And they would sit across from each other on that drum. And for the first time, their hearts beat with the same beat. And for the first time, their voices sang the same song. This is a story of a peaceful peace treaty between 2 warring nations. And I believe today's world leaders could learn a lot from that story. This song I'm going to share with you is an honor song. And it's one of the very first songs that I had learned as a kid. culture and in our stories, we have a lot of elements of a shapeshifter. So I created this fox to kind of embody that part of our stories. And yeah, there's a really cool story with this fox. I was in a play called Animal Farm, right? And we were all making our own puppets, and I was going to be the narrator. So I made this fox out there, and it was my job to go on stage, get in the chicken coop and tear up some puppet chickens. And so there I am doing this, and I'm doing such a really good job that I hear screaming from my audience. And I look up, and there's a third grade audience there, and a couple of kids, they were sitting there, their mouths were wide open, screaming, eyes wide. You know, they had tears coming down, snot coming down. You know, I was like, oh my God. I stood up and I took off my box and I said, hey man, it's all right, I'm a human. And then they started to cry. I felt really bad for those kids, you know, and I was like, oh man, that's too bad. But at the same time, there was a part of me that was like, yeah, good job. They believe that you really were a fox out there, you know. So, but I wanted to make this to embody that part of our culture, that shape-shifting part of it. A lot of our stories have to do with animals and stuff like that. I know a couple different animal stories. One I told earlier about the bear. And the bear, you know, at one time he had the most biggest, beautiful tails of all the animals, right? And he would go around to all the other animals and he would rub their noses with his tail. And he would tell them that he was blessed by the Creator, that the Creator loved him more than he loved all the other animals. How else could the bear, the makwa, have such a big, long, beautiful black tail? And all the other animals were like, oh yeah, okay, makwa, it's beautiful. But he kept on doing that with his ego, right? And the animals, they started to get tired of this. They're like, oh, whatever, makwa, we heard it 1,000 times, you got the biggest, beautiful tail. And as the animals were getting tired of this behavior, right, it was the fox who had devised a plan to teach the makwa a lesson. And the fox, he would find himself a gigu, a fish. And this is back in the time when the world was forever cold. So he would go out onto a frozen lake with this fish and he would sit there and he would wait for the makwa. And he would see the makwa start to come, you know, starting to walk. And the makwa could see the fox sitting out there and he could see this big, beautiful fish. And the makwa, he would go up to the fox and he would ask him, Fox, how did you catch such a big, beautiful fish? It's almost as big and beautiful as my big, fluffy tail. And the fox said, well, I had found a hole in the ice, and I had put my tail in the ice. And when I felt a tug on my tail, I knew it was a fish. And I pulled it out, and sure enough, now I have this big fish. And the makwa looked at him and he said, Fox, do you think that I can catch a fish with my big, beautiful tail? Will I catch the biggest, beautiful fish? And the fox looked at him and said, I'm sure you can, makwa, I'm sure you can. But first, you need to break a hole in the ice. So the makwa, we know he's the strongest of all the animals. He starts to use his makwa strength and he makes a hole. And then the fox tells him, now put your tail in that hole there and wait for a bite. And so he would. He would put his tail down in that hole and he would sit there and he said, Fox, how long does this take? And the fox said, a very long time, makwa. So the fox grabbed his fish and he walks off and the bear's sitting there. Pretty soon the bear gets bored. Pretty soon the bear gets tired and he falls asleep on the ice. And when he wakes up, he tries to get up to move, but he can't move. The hole that he had made had frozen over and had trapped his tail in the ice. So the makwa wanted to get up. He used all of his strength and he pushed himself up as hard as he could and he ripped off his own tail. It was sitting there in the ice. Yes. And we know today that because of this, the makwa, the bear, is one of the most grumpiest animals on This next song I'm going to share with you is called Shapeshifter. And it's all about those stories of us shape-shifting. And there is so many of them. We have one story that takes 4 days to tell. One story. I was teaching back home. And I had an educator come in, and I was like, 4 days? Like, that's kind of a long time. Can you cut corners? He's like, yeah, we can do that. We can get this story done in 2 days. 2 days. So we did it. We told this story, and it took a long time, but that's how it is. The traditional transfer of knowledge is passed on that way sometimes. This next song I'm going to share with you is called The Shapeshifter. Yes, the trickster, for sure. I know a lot of different stories about different animals. And a long time ago, before the universe was created, it was just a creator. And the creator would send out his voice. And it would echo around back to him without being heard. And this made the creator very, very lonely. And the creator would have what we call the Bawajigi, a vision. And in this vision, he saw all the galaxies, all the stars. He saw all the planets. He saw our galaxy with all the planets and Mother Earth. And as he approached Mother Earth, he could hear all these sounds that Mother Earth made. He saw the animals and all the landscapes. And when he came through from this vision, he realized that he needed to make this vision come true. So he would gather stuff from the four corners of the universe, and he would blow into the sacred mega shell, creating life everywhere. And as he looked down on life, on the creation, he would then send down original man, the last, the human. He would send down original man, and he would place him down on the Creator's creation, on the Gittagani, in the garden, Mother Earth. And he would task original man to name everything in creation. And as he did this, he spent time with the animals. And he noticed that all the animals came in twos, yet he was all alone. And he would go before the Creator and he would ask him, why does everything come in twos yet I am all alone? And the Creator would respond with, I will send somebody to walk, talk, and play with you. And he would send to him the Maingan, the wolf. And he would ask him, what will you have me do with this Maingan, this wolf? He would say, together you two will name everything in creation. Visit all those sacred places. So the two had set off on their path. And as they did this, they became bonded like brothers. And after they had visited all those sacred places and had named all of the creation, they would go again before the Creator and ask him, now what will you have of us? And the Creator would respond with, now you must go your separate ways. Because the people, the first people, Earth's first people coming, will not understand your bond. And they will fear you and they will hunt you. So from that point on, original man and Maingan had split and had went their separate ways. And it broke their hearts because they were like brothers. This song I'm going to play for you now comes from those wolves. I have a wolf pack back home called the Echo Valley Wolf Pack. I would go and sit with these wolves at a safe distance and play as I listened to them call and response. So this next song I'm going to share with you is called Maingan. And it's all about that journey of original man and the wolf together. For us, the wolf represents humility. Humility in the sense that the wolf has taught us how to hunt together in a pack and has taught us how to treat each other like a family. Those are some of the traditional teachings. While we're on the subject of the Maingan, the wolf, I have over 20 flutes here. Each one has its own story, its own spirit, and its own song. I can't read music just yet, so when I find a flute, I go out in the woods and I learn these songs. And this flute was gifted to me by one of my fellow tribal members and flute makers. And he would tell me that he found this wolf out in the woods and he had passed away. So he would scavenge what he could off of it. He took the hide, and he took the bones, and he made flutes out of the bones. He would gift me one of those flute bones, and he would say to me that many years from now we'll come together, and we'll play the same song on the same animal. And I just thought, wow, what a beautiful, beautiful story. So I would go out into the woods, and I would start to play this flute, and I could hear a song in there. And I started to play it, and then all of a sudden, I could hear like a wolf howling. So I started to howl back. And pretty soon I got my phone out, and I'm making a video out in the woods howling. And I thought it was a good video, so I wrote up a really nice story about how it was gifted to me, what my friend said. And I would post this onto YouTube, right, calling it the Wolf Bone Echo. And after it was up for a couple weeks, I noticed that he had commented. And he had said in the comment, it said, oh wait, I forgot to tell you it's not a wolf bone. And then there I even named the song, the Wolf Bone Echo. It's like, oh man, like I'm not going to change this whole story up now and do all this. So I would see him later, and I would ask him, I said, hey, you told me that was a wolf bone, it's not. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry. He's like, that's a cougar bone flute. And I said, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. And he goes, well, how is that? And I said, well, whenever I play this flute on a full moon, all the cougars come out. This flute has a really nice voice to it. And this song is called The Wolf Bone Echo, played on a cougar bone flute. This next flute I'm going to share with you is the double drone flute. And it has a couple stories with it, as do most of my flutes do. But when I play the double drones, I like to think of it as us coming together. It's two separate flutes coming together to make this very, very beautiful, unique sound. And I look at us as a lot like that, because here we are, all coming together in a circle tonight and all paying homage and respect to those who have come before us, those who have passed on these stories so that we may learn, so that we may survive, so that we know how to treat each other. Having a spiritual value, cultural, moral foundation is important for all of us humans that populate Mother Earth. I want to quote one of these guys that I had heard, but he had said when he was talking about the United States and the American people, he said, they like to tell us a lot that we're a nation of immigrants, but that's not true. We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation with immigrants. We are a nation with Native Americans, and we are a nation with African American descent, whose ancestors didn't have a choice to come here. They were brought here in chains on ships, and to put them into that group of being immigrants takes away from those accomplishments in their communities. And some of those accomplishments, of course, include holding the highest office in the land. Not only that, but science, education, music, all those great contributions. And when we look at that, how we are all different parts of our American society, we look at the indigenous people and those gifts that we have given to not only to this country, but to the world, really, with our corn, tomatoes, potatoes, tobacco. We revolutionized agriculture all over the world. We have helped so much. When we look at the founding of this country, our forefathers studied the Iroquois Confederacy, who were 5 separate tribes that couldn't speak each other's languages. They all had different ways of being, and they all fought each other. But they were able to come together, and they took all their implements of war, and they buried them. And that's where that term comes from, burying the hatchet. Those first Americans would look at their governing system, and from that they would birth democracy. So the indigenous people had firsthand in helping create America. And that should be really one of our strengths as a people, is we come from all over Mother Earth, calling this place home. Many different cultures, many different diversity, right? Celebrating diversity is a really, really good thing, having that empathy and compassion. But we really know, too, what the world really needs, too, is that unity, right? It needs us all coming together, all on that same page. This next song I'm going to play is about that, about us coming together. And it really doesn't have a title to this song. It's only got that story and that vibe. Chimigwich, thank you very much. I just would like to say Chimigwich to Doug for inviting me down. Chimigwich to all the Bay Stalkers that came out tonight and to support us here. I think it's really a great thing that we can come into each other's spaces and we can share a little bit about what we know and a little bit about our cultures and stuff, bringing us closer together. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of that. I just want to say Chimigwich. We don't have any words for goodbye. We have Giguwabamin, which means see you later. And the spirits will decide when we meet again. Aha, Chimigwich. Thank you very much.